Saya in Cairo, and this is CNN.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, October the 16th. I'm Nina Dos Santos at the South Bank in London.
And I'm Pauline Chu at CNN Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today.
Well, of course, these are our top stories today. Just one day to avoid a default in Washington. The talking goes on, but of course there's deadlock over raising the U.S. debt ceiling.
China's been on a spending spree in America. We look at a record year for acquisitions and what's to come.
Also on the show, Intel just about beat them, but what's the outlook like for this bellwether company?
We'll get back to business news in just a moment, but first, these are the top news stories that we're following here at CNN. There are reports that Iran says it will accept snap visits of its nuclear sites. Officials from Tehran are scheduled to meet with Western delegates in Geneva today for a second round of nuclear talks. On Tuesday, Iran made confidential proposals that the European Union called, quote, very useful. The U.S. says it was the first time Iran engaged in a very detailed technical discussion. In the Philippines, government officials now say at least 127 people were killed in Tuesday's powerful earthquake. More than 180 people are injured. The 7.1 magnitude tremor triggered landslides and damaged buildings. Rescue crews have been digging through the rubble looking for victims. Overnight demonstrations turned violence in the streets of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Thousands of protesters came out in Rio and also in Sao Paulo to support teachers striking for higher pay and for better working conditions. Police fired tear gas and pepper spray to disperse the crowds. Some demonstrators hurled stones at Molotov cocktails. The U.S. is creeping closer to a debt default. Lawmakers went home on Tuesday without a deal to allow more government borrowing, despite another day of talks. Democrats and Republicans in the Senate said they were close to agreeing on a bill, but the chance of getting that through the House of Representatives seemed to be dwindling. The credit rating agency Fitch is warning it might cut its rating on U.S. bonds. Right now, Fitch gives the U.S. a perfect AAA credit rating, but it says the brinkmanship over the debt ceiling is putting that rating at risk. And it is definitely going down to the wire. The deadline to raise the ceiling is just 20 hours away. The government says if that doesn't happen by Thursday, it'll start running out of money. CNN's Jim Acosta has more on the latest activity in Washington.
Time is running out. The debt ceiling is within sight, and the last best hope of avoiding a potential default once again rests with Senate leaders Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell. We're back to working on a last-minute deal.
John Boehner will likely be in a position where he will have to essentially pass the bill that is negotiated between Senators McConnell and Reid, and I believe that the House would first pass it, then send it to the Senate.
President Obama called for quick action.
We don't have a lot of time, and so what I'm suggesting to the congressional leaders is let's not do any posturing. Let's not try to save face.
The president appeared to put the blame on House Speaker John Boehner's inability to corral Tea Party-backed Republicans.
There have been repeated situations where we have agreements, then he goes back, and it turns out that he can't control his caucus.
That caucus is once again up in arms, despite Boehner's tough talk.
I have made clear for months and months that the idea of default is wrong, and we shouldn't get anywhere close to it.
The speaker failed to convince House conservatives to line up behind Republican proposals to lift the debt ceiling and end the shutdown. It didn't matter anyway. As Reid said, the GOP's plans were dead on arrival in the Senate.
Extremist Republicans in the House of Representatives are attempting to torpedo the Senate's bipartisan progress with a bill that can't pass the Senate.
That portrait of Washington dysfunction was all the respected Fitch ratings agency needed to see. Fitch issued a warning it may downgrade the nation's AAA credit rating, a potential repeat of what Standard & Poor's did after the last debt ceiling debate of 2011. Although Fitch continues to believe that the debt ceiling will be raised soon, the agency said, the political brinkmanship could increase the risk of a U.S. default. Some House conservatives were brushing off talk of dire consequences to come.
I just think most folks understand October 17th is not the drop-dead date. There are no payments due for a couple weeks.
Jim Acosta, CNN, Washington.
Well, I'm standing here on the south bank of the Thames, and that means that just behind me is the city, the financial district of London, where the working day has just gotten started about an hour and 5 minutes ago. Of course, the markets are being overshadowed by this uncertainty. The source of that may be Washington, but the consequences will be felt right around the world if the US has an issue with its debt ceiling and does indeed end up defaulting on its debt. So if there is a default, well, countries, of course, right around the world could lose out because a number of them hold a lot of US money. As we mentioned earlier, Fitch Ratings said that it may well lower the US's AAA credit rating, and in a statement the agency went into this kind of detail, saying that, quote, although Fitch continues to believe the debt ceiling will be raised soon, the political brinkmanship and reduced financing flexibility for America could increase the risk of a default. Well, that was pretty much what Standard & Poor's had to say back in 2011 when it too decided to downgrade the US credit rating during the country's last debt ceiling debacle. So let's have a look at how all this is affecting the markets and also the major currencies out there. People over here behind me are trading the London FTSE 100. I can tell you that that market is down around about 0.25% at the moment. The DAX more or less flat, but just south of the flat line. And we've also got the Paris CAC 40 down 0.2%, the Zurich SMI down around about 0.5%. These markets, I should point out, breaking a 4-day winning streak on the back of dissipating hopes, perhaps, that the US will manage to overcome its political hurdles. Well, that's it for the numbers on the markets, but how are the traders reacting to what's going on overseas? Let's go over to Isa Suarez, who's been speaking to a number of market makers on the CMC markets floor. Isa, what's the atmosphere like?
Well, Nina, I have to say, a bit of frustration, bewilderment, disbelief that we're still here 3 weeks on. I think a lot of people here are really scratching their heads that the US government hasn't been able to reach a solution by now. But the majority of people, the majority of traders here at the CMC say that a deal will be done, a crisis will be averted, probably by today, they are hoping. And really 11th hour decision, that's what a lot of people think here. But they're not expecting a long-term solution, Nina. It's pretty much what Washington has on the card, so a kind of patchwork solution for the time being. But that's not what they want. They want something that will be sustainable, so they don't have to come back here in January, February of this year, which is what a lot of the traders I've been speaking to this morning saying that will probably happen. January, February, will come round again and we'll be in the same situation. Now, I've asked one trader here what he's been advising his clients. You know, if you want to invest in the US, what do you do? And he said to me, Isa, I'm basically telling them to be cautious. You want to go in, you need to be extremely cautious. There is basically lots of risk, no rewards, no upsides, he said. Just to give you an example, he said Goldman Sachs came out numbers in the last couple of days that this 3 weeks crisis that we've seen in the US has cost the US economy 0.9% of its GDP. And that is the problem. If it goes on any longer, he tells me, that will impact investor confidence in the US and really affect the credibility of the United States and have a ripple effect throughout the world, Nina.
Yeah, well, obviously all of this impacts the confidence, particularly of equity traders where you are, but there are also bond traders out there, and it really is the bond market that's many, many times bigger than the equity markets, Isa. A lot of people, presumably in the room behind you, are trading US Treasuries. How worried are they about the spectre of the world's most important country just running out of money?
Well, actually, they're not. They're actually pretty, I mean, despite the whole debacle, they're not too worried about that. I said, surely this should be a concern for you. He said, not so, you know, it will happen. Their concern, in fact, which I was surprised to hear, was there's so many people in the US that are not going back to work, and that is the main concern for them. So at the moment, if they pass the deadline, the US, they say they're confident, will have some money that's on the side to cover, to pay those bondholders, which that will be the priority. But for them, it's those people that are not being paid, those people that are not going back to work because money's not flowing in, visitors not coming into museums and parks, and that's slowing down the US economy, and that's the biggest concern. You know, the US, Nina, you know, companies and stock markets, they have really depend on the idea that the US is not reckless with its finances, and I think that's their concern. It's that image that you want to portray of credibility. If the US can't get its house in order right there, then it really impacts the rest of us. So for the time being, they're not so worried about bondholders, just what everyone's been talking at the moment, not meeting that deadline. Instead, they want to see this deal done so people in the US can get back to work and money can get flowing again.
Of course, we can't escape the irony, Issa, of the fact that 2 years ago, the boot was on the opposite foot when the United States was trying to lecture Europe about how to get its political house in order to fix its broken economy. Now people in Europe are worried about the inverse situation in America, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. You know, one trader said to me, you know, the stock markets, European stock markets, have gained some muscle in the last couple of years. You know, we've seen so much crisis from the US, from the European market crisis that we've seen here, to the emerging crisis. They've really, you know, a lot of it's priced in, so much so that when, you know, when we had the warning just came out from overnight from Fitch, a lot of them said it's priced in. We were expecting it, Isa, so they were not surprised. What they are concerned about is, you know, if this goes on any longer, then the damage that will have, just the talk of a downgrade. If you remember, Nina, back in 2011, we did see a downgrade on the US economy along the similar lines. So it's really worrying for them in that respect that this goes no further. But you know, the markets, they say they're priced in. They are expecting the government to come to their senses and just get the deal done. This drama, and they're saying, it's a bit like a soap opera where the two sides just fighting over each other, and you know, by the time one blames the other, a cliffhanger here and then by the time you realise you're over the cliff, and that's what they want to avoid.
All right, Isa Suarez there at CMC Markets on the trading floor, roundabout behind me where I am at St Paul's and Bank Station. Thanks so much for that. And Pauline, as Isa was just saying, a lot of this priced in, but really it's very difficult to quantify exactly what could happen if the United States does go over this deadline, which is 20 hours away and counting.
Yeah, Nina, even though it may be priced in, Issa was talking about credibility, and I think the credibility of the U.S., at least the politicians on Capitol Hill, has already been undermined because we've seen this again 2 years later. Well, today it was a volatile day of trading here in the Asia-Pacific region, and markets ended mixed with the Shanghai Composite down almost 2% today, and the composite dropped right after the open. China, of course, is the largest holder of U.S. debt with about $1.3 trillion in Treasury bills, notes, and bonds, so it stands to lose the most if the U.S. does indeed default. Now, Japan is second with $1.1 trillion worth of U.S. Treasuries, but Japanese investors have already pared down their positions in foreign bonds because at the beginning of this month, we have learned from the Ministry of Finance that domestic Japanese investors already sold off a record amount of foreign bonds, nearly $23 billion worth. So we see the uncertainty reach out across the Asia-Pacific region. And let's cross over now to David McKenzie, live at CNN Beijing. Now, David, you've been talking to several China experts. What is their perspective about the situation going on in Washington?
Well, their perspective is that it's a mess, and a lot of people watching the goings-on in Washington would probably agree with them because they are facing this debt ceiling crisis, which could end up the U.S. defaulting on its debts and not being able to pay the bills. Obviously, a lot of those bills would be due here in China, 1.3 trillion, as you say. China owns U.S. Treasury bonds, more than double it in just U.S. dollar assets. So China really could stand to lose a great deal should that default happen and should they be on the list of people that they don't pay. China, over decades, has bought up U.S. Treasury bonds because the U.S. is really the only market which is big enough and, in their minds, safe enough to park the excess cash that they make through their extraordinary export-driven economy here in China. So most economists I spoke to have said that they don't believe that they will miss that deadline, that the politicians will come up with some kind of brokered deal before it happens, but they are still preparing for that doomsday scenario. No one really knows how that will all play out because it really hasn't happened ever before. Pauline?
Yeah, the U.S. has never defaulted before. Now, even though China does have a lot to lose because it holds so much U.S. debt, is the country actually using this as an opportunity to push their own currency, the renminbi, since it's trying to internationalize it, and also to push its own investments abroad?
I think it's to push itself as an alternative to the U.S. economy. China is the second biggest economy globally. It's looking to become a bigger player on the fiscal stage. So yes, China has been using this as a way to push the PR battle. There was a Xinhua, the main state media commentary just yesterday, which called the world to de-Americanize its assets, to move away from the dollarization, which has effectively been the financial world order for many, many years. Most believe that it's not possible to move away from the dollar at this point. But China is enjoying, on some level, this uncertainty created by the U.S. House and Senate in the discussion. That is assuming they come up with a deal eventually, because if they don't come up with a deal, it's the worst case scenario for China and the global economy. One economist calling it 10 times worse than the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which kicked off the financial crisis. So there is that PR battle. Listen to what one analyst said about how China might be winning the soft power play against the United States.
For the past several years, Beijing has been trying to project this soft power, namely that the China model perhaps is the best for the world, particularly for developing countries. So this fiscal mess, which Washington has gotten into, I think, has provided them with a good excuse and ample ammunition to shoot down the so-called American consensus.
The big hypocrisy of that PR push, some say, is that China really has a need for U.S. treasuries. There's no other treasury market globally that could even come close to being the size of the amount of money that China needs to put away because of its surplus. Also, the treasuries obviously help the export market to the U.S. by keeping the price of the renminbi depressed in the bilateral trade with the U.S. So China needs the U.S. just as much as the U.S. needs China's cash right now. So certainly the leaders in Beijing will have cool heads during this period and hope, like everyone else, that they don't go through this barrier in Washington and start not paying the debts that are owed across the globe.
Yeah, we're all hoping and crossing our fingers, and China has more than $3 trillion of foreign exchange reserves, about a third of that in U.S. debt. So China is certainly having a lot at stake. David, thank you very much for the perspective from Beijing. And Nina, you were speaking earlier about how Europe is lecturing the U.S. right now. Well, they're getting it from both sides, because now China is also lecturing the U.S. and the politicians there as well.
Yeah, that's right. And we just heard from David there how China needs to keep on buying those treasuries, the United States government bonds, to try and keep its currency, the renminbi, low. But at the same time, it's trying to diversify itself away from that link with the United States. And London, the city of London behind me, over just the last week or so, has desperately been trying to capitalize on that, striking all sorts of agreements to create an offshore banking hub in the Chinese currency here in London. Well, still to come on World Business Today after the break, we're going to be focusing in on a big US bellwether. Intel results beat analyst expectations, but demand for PCs continues to wane. So what does that mean for chip makers in the future? We'll be speaking to Intel's European director next after this.
China reduce its reliance on coal-fired heating plants and prevent 60 million tons of CO2 emissions? When Emerson takes up the challenge, it's never been done before, simply becomes, consider it solved. Emerson.
CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily.
Our octopus.
Cuttlefish.
Pancetta Leonata. Oh, that looks good. This cheese. How do you say it in Italian? Swordfish. Looks like hell. Tastes like heaven. Smells good in here.
Chin.
Caponata. That's old school. That's Sicily right there.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily. Only on CNN.
Okay, how long do we have? Yep. Hello and welcome back. You're watching World Business Today. Well, Intel kicked Welcome back. You're watching World Business Today. Intel, as we were telling you before the break, kicked off a week of earnings results coming from some of the big technology companies. Shares of the world's largest chip maker closing down around about 1/4% on Tuesday. That was after the firm reported profit that just barely beat analyst expectations. However, I must caution that those expectations were actually based on a lowered forecast coming from Intel earlier this year. Intel says that third quarter profit fell around about 3% from the same period last year to $2.9 billion in total. Sales were little changed, standing at around about $13.5 billion, but it was the PC business that just continued to suffer from the shift towards tablet devices. Shipments and sales of PCs were both down from last year. Let's get more now on Intel's earnings outlook, and to give us the full picture is Peter Gleisner. He's the European director at Intel and joins us now live from CNN London. Great to have you on World Business Today. These figures are interesting because, of course, they're not as bad as some people had expected, but it doesn't address the fact that you're in a business that, frankly, is in terminal decline.
Thank you, Nina, for having me. The PC is continuing to evolve. I certainly would refute the fact that the PC is in terminal decline. I think, if anything, it is reinventing itself into new form factors. We see this in many of our businesses. Certainly, if you look at the desktop and the notebook business, you have new form factors coming to the market. In notebooks, 2-in-1s. Customers call them 100% PC, 100% tablets. These are all new products that will find customers and that will reinvigorate the market. So certainly not terminal decline. It is certainly a market that is continuing to reinvent itself, and Intel is at heart of that reinvention.
How can a big company like Intel, though, get the flexibility to reinvent itself at the pace this market is moving at?
By moving at that pace and faster. If you look at our new CEO, Brian Kazanich, and his mandate to move the company forward, move us aggressively into ultra-mobility. We're making excellent progress in that area. If you look at our overall strategy of shaping and leading in all areas of compute, towards that end, we have introduced 40 new products based on our 22-nanometer leading manufacturing process this year in all areas of computing, from high-performance computing to desktop to notebook to tablets, phone, and into Internet of Things. So a very strong lineup and a very fast pace that Intel is ready to execute on and that we're delivering to the market.
All right, Peter Gleisner, we wish you the best of luck with those projects. Thanks so much for joining us there. Peter Gleisner there, the head of Intel here in Europe. Pauline.
Well, still to come, Nina, on World Business Today. Far away from Washington's Capitol Hill, the standoff between Democrats and Republicans is causing heartache and disappointment. The last resting place of thousands of Americans who fought for freedom off limits while the political fighting on Capitol Hill rages on.
Amazing in motion. Created by Lexus. Sponsors of Blueprint.
Oro kayak is this box that turns into a kayak. So it's an origami kayak. It's one sheet of corrugated plastic that opens up, and you snap a couple of buckles together and becomes a kayak within 5 minutes.
I figured that there would be some compromises in the product from folding, but actually I really ended up surprising myself on this. It's a really high-performance boat.
With Kickstarter campaign, goal was to raise $80,000 to start the company, but we managed to hit that goal in 5.5 hours. It was a very magical day. I guess the shock came in when it would take us 2 days to make one kayak. Now we have to go make 500 of kayaks. We need to scale this up, and we need to make sure that we can do it in a short amount of time.
You've been wanting to get this kind of access. Unfiltered, face-to-face exposure to Africa's key players who have a hand on what's next and know what works. Stop waiting for that door to open.
This is your opportunity for FaceTime.
They are the biggest names shaping Africa's business, and you want to know what they know.
And I think that's why Africa is attractive.
FaceTime Africa, every Friday on CNN, in association with MTN.
These are the wrecks of just some of the vessels that have brought thousands of immigrants here to Lampedusa.
This is taking you to the heart of the story.
You can see some of the refugees have left items of clothing, a pair of jeans here. You get a sense that if you imagine hundreds of people crammed onto this ship, just how desperate those making that dangerous journey from North Africa to here must be.
This is CNN.
Let's take a look at weather right now in World Business Today. Deadly typhoon Waipa is quickly racing away from Japan, but it did hit on Tuesday with damaging winds and startling rain totals. Meteorologist Ivan Cabrera joins us live from the Weather Center with more details. And Ivan, you did warn us that it was going to be a strong one.
Yeah, one of the strongest we've had in a long time, and deadly, of course, now with the casualties continuing to mount, mostly as a result of what happened across south of Tokyo on that island. We'll be talking about that in a second. Here's the storm. If you're curious where it is, it's racing off to the northeast. Not a typhoon, not a tropical system now, a post-tropical here. In fact, we're looking at snow for Hokkaido in the next 24 to 48 hours, a good 20 to 25 centimeters of snowfall. As you can clearly see, the storm has transitioned into a post-tropical system. Typhoons don't drop snow in any areas here. Now, 246, that's how much rain Tokyo received in just 24 hours. Keep in mind, the monthly average is only about 198, so we got more than our share, and we're not even halfway through the month. 161, that was the strongest wind gust. Didn't quite get to that in Tokyo, but it was windy enough. Take a look at the scene along Tokyo streets here and through the buildings, and this is just a mess to be out here, and people trying to get to work. From point A to point B, of course, transportation was severely disrupted as a result of this. Lots of cancellations, and it's just dangerous to be out and about, really. Now, further south, this is what I was talking about here. We have to take you about 120 kilometers south. Look at what this system did here in Oshima Island. Just incredible rain totals here, 823 millimeters. We got half a meter of that in 6 hours. That happened through the day on Wednesday. So we have a daily record, a 24-hour record, and the most rain they've ever seen in 2 hours. Storm, as I said, now gone. Just some gusty winds on the backside of it. This is our next one here. This will be Francisco. Also destined to become a typhoon, also perhaps will impact with Japan eventually, but we have time to watch it. You can see it here over open water. Just mainly a threat right now to Guam with some squally weather there, but over the next few days we'll see its evolution to a potentially strong typhoon. Now, as we check in on Europe, we have storminess to the south and east, showers and thunderstorms here, but more importantly, Nina dos Santos outside in London. Look at this, a band of showers coming in. You may not make it, Nina, before the end of the show here without getting a little wet, but I see you have prepared. Pauline, I think she's prepared. She's got her rain gear on. It looks like that coat can be submerged in water, I think.
Yeah, it looks like very nice fabric. I'm not sure if it's waterproof there. I hope she has an umbrella
we may find
on
out
the
soon.
sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I did hear her earlier saying that it was very, very chilly, and she is certainly bundled up. So at least she's keeping warm. We just need to make sure she keeps dry. All right, Ivan, thank you very much. Still to come right here on World Business Today, we'll check out the storm, the figurative storm over Capitol Hill. The debt ceiling deadline is less than 20 hours away. Experts weigh in on the prospect of a U.S. default. That's in just a moment.
Witchdeck Roofing, changing the roofs of Africa. Powered by AHI Roofing New Zealand, pioneers of stone-coated roofs around the world. AHI Roofing is owned by Fletcher Building, which has over 100 years history in producing building products of excellent quality. Fletcher Building became the largest company listed in the New Zealand Stock Exchange in 2010. Witchdeck Roofing, changing the roofs of Africa.
Barack Obama will be re-elected President of the United States.
Dawn in Aleppo brings the clatter of gunfire. There seems to be no pattern to the attacks unless they are designed to sow fear among the civilians.
This is the reality of what kids think about race.
This is Emmy-winning journalism. This is CNN.
The table is set for you to get a different view of China.
Join me for an intimate and revealing discussion with people who know China better than anyone.
This month on China, cracking down on political corruption.
You mentioned for the Chinese Communist Party, fighting corruption is a matter of life and death. Why is it a matter of survival for the party? Why is it that critical?
It's a view from the inside out. On China, today, only on CNN. On the next Open Court, it's a workout to remember. World number 4 David Ferrer runs Pat through the paces.
I was the fittest player in tennis 25 years ago.
Plus, fearless on court and off. See how the sky's the limit for Swiss star Stan Wawrinka. Open Court, Thursday on CNN. In association with Rado.
Aiming for gold. Join a global journey that ends at the Sochi Games. This month, get into the mindset of Olympic hockey players.
It's a different type of feeling that you can speak your native language all the time.
And
it was tough today.
it's extremely hard. Training for skiing in the summer. Aiming for gold. Saturday on CNN in association with Russian Railways.
I'm Phil Black in Moscow, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN Hong Kong, I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Nina Dos Santos on the London South Bank, just across the side of the river from the financial heart of Britain, which is the City of London. A warm welcome back to World Business Today from this chilly morning in the Thames. Let's have a look at how the markets are trading. On the other side of the river, the FTSE 100 down, like a number of these other European markets. All this has a lot to do with, as you'd imagine, the countdown towards the expiry of the US debt ceiling, or when the US reaches its $16.7 trillion debt ceiling and can't go over that. Might point out that a number of these markets also snapping a 4-day winning streak, which just goes to exemplify how worried people are getting about this. But as Isa Suarez was telling us earlier on the show, Pauline, well, a lot of people are optimistic. It'll go down to the wire, but they'll eventually strike an 11th hour agreement.
Yeah, well, it's nice to hear that investors are optimistic. I'm not so sure I'm such an optimist, maybe more of a realist, because we've all seen this picture before. It was a rather volatile trading day here in the Asia-Pacific region. We saw a mixed picture here, but the Shanghai Composite dropped the most, dropped down by almost 2%. And it's clear to see the reason why, because as we discussed earlier with David McKenzie, China is the largest holder, foreign holder of U.S. debt, so they have a lot to lose. They hold $1.3 trillion worth, so they certainly don't want to see the U.S. default. The Hang Seng also down by about 0.5%. And we did see Hong Kong take some precautionary measures last week when the Hong Kong Stock Exchange said that it was issuing a discount to U.S. Treasuries. In other words, it wants traders to put up more U.S. Treasuries as collateral because, in their view, it's not worth as much. So that's to cover their trade. So you saw precautionary measures there. Also, in Tokyo, we learned last week from the Ministry of Finance that domestic Japanese investors, they sold off a lot of foreign bonds in the first week of October. It was the most that they've ever seen since data was collected, I think, from 2005, according to the Ministry of Finance. We don't know if a lot of that, what the makeup of that was, but we can presume that most of that was U.S. Treasuries as investors are paring their positions there. Now let's take a look at futures. All the key indices in the U.S. are in the green. Investors remain hopeful that Washington lawmakers will reach a resolution before Thursday's deadline to raise the debt ceiling. So as you can see, there is optimism here. But a ratings agency, Fitch, has put the U.S. on rating watch negative and warned of a possible downgrade if there's a default. Let's go straight to Maribel Aber live at CNN New York. So Maribel, we are seeing this sort of optimism. I'm not so sure I'm that optimistic because we've seen this happen before 2 years ago where politicians really push the envelope to the last minute. But what is your sense that investors really do believe politicians will come to some sort of resolution?
Hi, Pauline. See, the thing is that, as you said before, we've been down this road before, right? And I think we're all sort of used to this last-minute deal. Look, lawmakers are racing against the clock to cobble a plan together that will pass the Senate and then the House by midnight. Right now, you know, you just saw them right there. Futures are higher across the board, and that's after a Wall Street sell-off yesterday. Wall Street, when things went south in House negotiations aimed at avoiding a debt ceiling disaster. And as we've been saying, you know, today, well, Thursday, October 17th, is the day that Treasury Secretary Jack Lew said the U.S. will run out of money to pay all its debts unless the borrowing limit is raised. And it's estimated the U.S. will have about $30 billion on hand, plus money coming in from tax receipts. But, of course, this really isn't the drop dead date as far as a default goes. We've been watching this, Wall Street watching that, and Wall Street thinking that the real default date may be sometime in late October. So we might be seeing that in the markets. But whatever the case, the threat of a default has been really unsettling investors and driving up rates on the shortest duration U.S. Treasuries, just in case there is some kind of disruption in the Treasury's ability to pay out bonds. And real quickly, just want to go through some dates here. October 17th, Treasury Department runs out of short-term funding moves. The 22nd, the Congressional Board Budget Office exhausts reserves, starts missing payments. Now we start getting scary times here. October 23rd, $12 billion in Social Security payments scheduled. October 31st, estimates, the CBO says, exhaust cash balance of $6 billion interest payment due. And by November 1st, $55 billion in Medicare, Social Security, and military payments are scheduled. So it is scary times. Pauline.
Yeah, when you mentioned that November 1st deadline with the $50+ billion worth, I mean, that's way more than what Jack Lew says will be at hand, which is that $30 billion. So that makes investors and regular Americans very, very nervous. Maribel, thank you very much. Maribel Aber there, live from New York. Nina.
Pauline, as you'd expect, all sorts of experts right around the world warning that a U.S. default would be literally disastrous for the markets. Take a listen to what they've been saying.
Congress right now is playing Russian roulette, not just with the U.S. economy, but with the global economy. The global economy functions with the U.S. at its core, and within the core are U.S. treasuries. So if you start threatening the standing of U.S. Treasury, you cause major systemic risk. Now, we've seen some damage in terms of economic activity, but that will be nothing compared to what would happen if the U.S. were to default on its debt. Now, this is not going to happen in the short term, but the closer they get to the stage where they run out of money, the greater the market is going to start functioning really badly.
That's why the Russians, the Chinese, and some of the other people are starting to say, okay, we've got to figure out something to at least compete with the U.S. dollar, if not replace the U.S. dollar. And you're sitting here in Asia, especially where they have huge assets. The largest creditor nations in the world are China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. And they're sitting saying, why are we financing these guys who keep going deeper and deeper into debt? Let's figure out an alternative. Wouldn't you?
Now, as you heard there, many people are warning of the devastating impact of a U.S. default. So let's lay out some of the worst-case scenarios. Stock markets could take a hit, in turn causing investor confidence to crumble. And some say this kind of a blow could be very severe, and severe enough to lead to a recession. Cash could also become scarce. Investors will have a hard time getting their money back, as well as borrowing more as banks become more wary of lending. Now, some financial institutions could also collapse. That happened to Lehman Brothers, which pretty much became the symbol of the 2008 financial crisis. And that crisis, of course, changed the landscape of the financial sector, and it took about 5 years to get back on our feet. These, of course, are just some of the worst possible scenarios that might, and we emphasize might, come out of a U.S. default, which would be the first time that has happened in history. Now, the other possibility is that Congress reaches a deal at the very last minute to avoid a default. But as Brian Todd reports, that wouldn't be the end of the matter either.
Even if there's a deal this time, that gnawing in your gut could well return in a few weeks.
You're governing by crisis, and that is no way to govern.
Congressional expert Norman Ornstein believes there'll be more cans kicked down the road until the next shutdown or debt ceiling crisis. The chance now of a long-term so-called grand bargain, almost zero, he says, because on one side, far-right conservatives in the House will never agree to raise taxes, even a little. That would go back on their no taxes pledges, and Tea Party and other conservative leaders would work against them in their re-election bids.
The nature of primaries, the fact that so many people live in homogeneous districts that become echo chambers, all of that makes it harder to overcome now a set of realities where our political process is driven by a small group of Americans who are more ideologically driven and not by the vast majority of Americans who still say, come on, compromise a little bit and move us forward.
How'd it get this way? Ornstein says it goes back to the financial collapse of 2008 when George W. Bush was president. Far-right conservatives, he says, hated the bailout.
The resentment against political leaders working with Wall Streeters to bail them out while the rest of the country paid for it just deeply amplified the kind of resentment against government per se. Then the continuing sluggish economy created the Tea Party movement.
But analysts say it's not just the Tea Partiers who've dug in and created this mess.
There's blame all around, including the White House.
Meaning Democrats may feel they've had the upper hand politically, making them less willing to negotiate. It's created a more personal, deep-seated reason why a real long-term agreement between these key players may be elusive.
The trust has disappeared, and it's increasingly being replaced by hatred. There is a lot of deep alienation and just plain don't like each other, don't want to sit down at the same table with each other.
Or as Norman Ornstein says, it's become tribal in nature, with leaders of both parties saying, if you're for it, I'm against it, even if I was for it yesterday. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
Just after the break, Chinese buyers are on a spending spree in the U.S. Acquisition-happy investors are looking to get a foothold in the West, and they're doing it by way of billion-dollar buyouts. We've got all the details coming up.
Welcome to the world's 9th largest country, seated in the heart of the Eurasian continent. To the country that has access to a potential market of 500 million people. To Central Asia's strongest economy with the most attractive tax climate in the Commonwealth of Independent States and Eastern Europe. Make use of the state program of accelerated industrialization that made us number 10 in the World Investor Protection List. Join those who are already joining this. Discover, explore, invest in Kazakhstan.
Information is knowledge, information is power, information is security. And I strongly believe our viewers, people all over the world, have real questions of their own. They want to know what's happening in their world, what it means to them, how it'll affect them. And so it's really up to us, once we get elected officials or anybody in public positions in front of us, to keep up the persistence to get out of them really what we're searching for.
Christiane Amanpour, asking questions that help you make sense of the world. Amanpour, tonight on CNN. CNN News Center, tonight on CNN.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching World Business Today live from CNN Hong Kong and also the London South Bank. We're going to focus in on China though, because its super rich population just keeps getting richer, especially last year. It seems it got an awful lot richer. Never mind what you might have heard about a slowing Chinese economy, Forbes magazine says that it's been a record year for the country's mega wealthy. It's named 168 billionaires there, not bad for a communist country, and says that that's more than China has ever had before. The combined fortunes of the 100 100 richest Chinese people shot up some 44% in just the last 12 months to a total of $316 billion. The man with the deepest pockets is the real estate mogul Wang Jianlin, who runs the Dalian Wonder Group. Forbes says that his net worth grew around about $14 billion in just the last year. And now he's looking west. Last year, he bought the US cinema company chain AMC for a price tag of some $2.6 billion, Pauline.
And Nina, it's not just American entertainment venues that have drawn Asian investors. 2012 was a record year for Chinese acquisitions in the U.S. In addition to the AMC sale, the aircraft firm AIG sold 80% of its plane leasing unit for more than $4 billion. Just last year, mainland investors pumped a total of $10.5 billion into acquiring other American companies. Now, 2013 has set yet another record. Last month saw the largest ever purchase of a U.S. company by a Chinese buyer. You might remember this because it created a lot of press and also initially criticism. Shanghai International bought the world's largest pork processor, U.S.-based Smithfield Foods. Now, it comes as the latest move in China's spending spree in the West. Now, we have an expert with us who says that the age of made in China branding may be a thing of the past. What's next could be the decade of owned in China. Nirmalya Kumar is a professor from the London Business School, and he's just written a new book about why Chinese companies are using acquisitions to fast-track entry into international markets. And Nirmalya, thank you very much for being with us. So from made in China to owned by China, and we're already seeing this. We usually see this in the resource sector and then in food safety issues. What kind of trends are you seeing in terms of what the Chinese are interested in?
So I think you pointed out very correctly that resources is, of course, the big trend, you know, that owning tracts of land, owning access to dairy resources. But what you're very interestingly seeing that many Chinese companies are saying, instead of us having to build a brand that can be accepted by Western consumers, why not buy the brand? And as you know, many European and American companies are struggling, so it's a perfect time to buy brands. So that's why you see Volvo, Saab, Rover, Weetabix, all these falling into Chinese hands.
And the interesting thing is that even though some of these Western brands are acquired by Chinese companies, the average consumer may not know that the owner is actually Chinese. For example, with the AMC deal, I would venture to guess if you asked any American who AMC is owned by, they would not know that it's owned by a Chinese investor.
And that is by design, because people in the West have some obstacles to buying brands that are made in China. So if you're a Chinese company and you want to attract Western and European or American consumers, the easiest way to do that is to buy a brand which they think is non-Chinese.
But is that a good strategy? Because eventually you say the next stage is to internationalize the Chinese brand, to make Chinese brand names known and to go out into the international market. I mean, that's the next stage of growth, isn't it?
Yeah. So basically you'll have to employ a dual strategy. One strategy is there's some people who never buy a Chinese brand. To them, you attack them with the brands you acquired. There are other people who can be convinced to buy a Chinese brand if they believe there's price value in it. And those people you attack with your homegrown brands, as Huawei is doing, Haier is doing, Lenovo is doing.
Okay, what about the whole suspicion factor? Because we saw Huawei trying to get into the U.S. market with telecoms contracts, and the U.S. Congress said, no, thank you. This is a national security issue. And it was a tough battle, and Huawei lost. So how do you get over that suspicion bump?
So this is going to take a long time. It's not going to be something that's going to be done overnight. Huawei has been very smart in saying, okay, the telecom network operations, maybe you don't want from Huawei, but you may take our handsets. So they're attacking this market in a different way, and they're selling their handsets, you know, which of course are not considered a security risk. So they've gone into adjacent categories where there's less resistance.
Now, we've also seen the Beijing encourage companies to push out abroad and also to internationalize the yuan. And just last week, there was an announcement that the ECB, the European Central Bank, is going to do direct currency trades with the renminbi. Now, China already has these kinds of agreements with Australia, Japan, and South Korea, and a couple of other countries. So this is a huge feather in the cap for China. Does this make it easier for Chinese companies to go out and acquire and invest?
I think in terms of, it does make it a bit easier for Chinese companies, but there's really been no restriction because most Chinese companies, can convert their currency and make the acquisitions. So that's not the problem. The problem is only in very sensitive sectors do the Western governments have some apprehension. So the Western governments have, kind of a dilemma in the sense they do want Chinese investment. On the other hand, they're suspicious of Chinese investments. So they're going to have to resolve it amongst themselves.
But they certainly want their money if
That's
they
what
can
I'm
get
saying.
it.
So they want the investment, but they're suspicious. So they're going to have to resolve this amongst themselves. China can actually stand on the sidelines and watch them resolve it.
Nirmalya, thank you very much. A fascinating discussion there. Nirmalya Kumar is a professor at the London Business School and has written a new book about branding out of emerging markets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nina, back over to you in London.
Thanks so much, Pauline. We're going to be continuing this kind of discussion. Tigers and flies. It's a well-known phrase in Asia. It's synonymous with corrupt political leaders in China. And Beijing's newly elected Politburo, it seems, is determined to weed them out from the provinces all the way up to the top of the food chain. On this month's On China, Christy Lustout talks to a panel of experts about President Xi Jinping's pledge to crack down on corruption. Here's a snippet of that conversation.
Said that in this anti-corruption drive, they're going to be targeting the tigers and the flies. What does that mean, tigers and flies?
The tigers, by the way, this phrase, that's not his creation. Chen Mao came out with this phrase in the 50s. The tigers refers to big corrupt officials and the flies, little officials. And the truth is that so far, the anti-corruption campaign, most of the corrupt officials being caught are flies, the very few tigers.
Xi Jinping has only caught one tiger. A ministerial level official and a very powerful former head of the CNPC, the China National Petroleum Corporation. And all of us observers in Beijing and Hong Kong are wondering whether he will do something to Zhou Yongkang, who is a member of the Standing Committee.
The ex-security chief of China?
Yes, yes. And also a senior member of the so-called petroleum faction, because he spent most of his career in the petroleum industry. So at least half of the vice ministerial and ministerial level officials who Xi Jinping has brought to justice have close connections to Zhou Yongkang. So I think this is a very important litmus test as to whether Wang Qishan and Xi Jinping are willing to break certain conventions, because that is one well-known convention within the Communist Party, even though it is not publicized, and that is former and current members of the Politburo Standing Committee are untouchable. You cannot charge them with criminal offenses.
Well, you can see that discussion in full in this month's On China. That is at 5:30 p.m. in Hong Kong, just over half an hour from now, 10:30 a.m. if you're watching from London.
And still to come right here on World Business Today, divided over handling America's debt. U.S. lawmakers are running out of time to save the country from default. We'll take a closer look at the stalemate.
In the business of bringing joy, Kirloskar goes much beyond enriching lives.
CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily.
Octopus. Cuttlefish. Pancetta. Leonata. Oh, that looks good. This cheese. How do you say it in Italian? Swordfish. Looks like hell. Tastes like heaven. Smells good in here. Chin. Caponata. That's old school. That's Sicily right there.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Sicily. Only on CNN.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching World Business Today. As we were saying earlier on in the show, the United States is now close to 19 hours away from reaching its $16.7 trillion debt ceiling. And that means that if it goes over that without the possibility of borrowing more money, well, the United States could perhaps run out of money completely. And that means it could default on some of its payments. So as we were saying, 19 hours away from that really crucial deadline. So far, lawmakers in Congress have let's have a look at what they've been saying. They've been yet to agree on a deal, as we were saying before, Pauline, but that hasn't stopped the credit ratings agencies from warning them that they could cut.
And Fitch is saying they may cut because of that political brinkmanship and that stalemate that they've been seeing in Washington. That's the exact reason that S&P 2 years ago decided to knock off the U.S.'s AAA credit rating. They also cited that government stalemate there and dysfunction. Now, it's definitely going down to the wire. The U.S. Treasury says it'll start running out of money if lawmakers do not act soon. But getting them to agree on something is a lot easier said than done. We heard so many mixed messages from U.S. lawmakers on Tuesday that it's difficult to know exactly where things stand. Here's a brief look back.
I think we'll get an agreement today.
We're not there yet.
I think it's going pretty well. The adults have taken over.
There have been no decisions about what exactly we will do.
A tentative agreement has been reached.
This is not a compromise. It's a hostage taking.
Why are they doing this to the American people?
There will be a deal, in my opinion.
There will not be a vote.
We're agreeing this bill that they're sending over here is doomed to failure.
So let's have a look at how this is affecting traders' days over here in the City of London. Remember that the people on the other side of the river here in the beating heart of London's financial district are trading all sorts of UK markets, US futures, European markets, and crucially those treasuries. As you can see, European markets, including the FTSE 100, snapping a four-day winning streak. We have the FTSE down despite the fact that we had an interesting, not so bad unemployment picture coming out just an hour ago from the Office for National Statistics. It just hasn't been enough, Pauline, to counter the downbeat momentum.
Right, the debt ceiling overshadowing everything around the world. And here in the Asia-Pacific region, we did have a volatile day, even though it was a bit of a mixed picture. The Nikkei was up about 0.2%, but the Shanghai Composite, these numbers are actually not correct. The Shanghai Composite was down by more than 2%. So we'll take those numbers off because we do want to let our viewers know that we did see some volatility today in the markets, and especially in China, because China does hold so much U.S. debt, and so does Japan, even though Japanese investors have pared some of their holdings at the beginning of October. Well, let's end this newscast on a much lighter note, because it appears that billionaire Warren Buffett is not only a business brain, he's also quite the performer.
Of love.
Oxygen, oxygen.
That's Warren Buffett there singing. The 83-year-old Berkshire Hathaway boss broke out a ukulele and sang with actress Glenn Close in front of an audience on Tuesday. Their duet was part of Fortune's Most Powerful Women's Summit in Washington. Apparently, it was the debut of their band, and get this, Nina, the name of their band is the Bunny Boiler and the Low Bidder. A Bunny Boiler referring to that famous scene that Glenn Close had in that movie, Fatal Attraction. So there you have it, the new rock band of the finance world and of Hollywood. Glenn Close and Warren Buffett. And you know, we need some levity after all the seriousness about the debt ceiling.
Yeah, they certainly can't sing the praise of Congress, I might say. Even if Warren Buffett is often very good at trying to put a cheery note on some of the dreary things that we've seen on the markets. Well, that's it for this early edition of World Business Today. Pauline and myself will be back in 4 hours' time with, of course, that crucial opening bell on Wall Street. In the meantime, though, CNN Newsroom is next.
With 17 Grand Slam titles and 7 coveted Wimbledon championships, Roger Federer's name is securely carved in the history books as one of the greatest players in tennis. This week on Talk Asia, we're with the ever-popular player in Shanghai, who reveals why his training starts at home with his wife.
Does she ever question you if you lose?
Oh yeah, she'll tell me that was an awful match. What's wrong with you? You know how friends and family are. They'll tell you the truth.
Talk Asia, Saturday only on CNN.
On the next Open Court, it's a workout to remember. World number 4 David Ferrer runs Pat through the paces.
I was the fittest player in tennis 25 years ago.
Plus, fearless on court and off. See how the sky's the limit for Swiss star Stan Wawrinka. Open Court, Thursday on CNN. In association with Rado.
Aiming for gold.